This isn't as choreographed as you might think. The three of us, we've just gotten together about 2 hours ago. And so we'll run through it. I'm going to be brief. I'm going to do my best to stay on script and read from the words in front of me. That way I can pass off to Senna, Patrick, who are actually the role models here. We've got a lot of information as it relates to ocean and man. Marine Mammal Alliance Nantucket is a new organization. But 41 years ago, Jean Rio, the woman on the right, started the Marine Mammal Conservation Program. Jean, who is on our board and still does the whale information stations on Main Street, which you may have seen, has them there every summer, usually out in front of the little pharmacy. She is passionate about whales and educating folks about whales, still as she was in 1977. I took over the Nantucket Marine Mammal Conservation Program in 2009, but we desperately needed a marine mammal stranding team on Nantucket. To do that, we needed an agreement, a legal document with the federal government. So MAN was formed, applied for, and received its 501c3 status just over a year ago. MAN is an education and outreach organization, an advocacy organization that affects policy by working with stakeholders, voters, visitors, industry, and government through that outreach and education, and a marine mammal response team. The following brief presentation provides examples of what MAN does and must continue to do. The Wall of Whales with the Nantucket Elementary School helps students connect dots globally, in this case between Nantucket and New Zealand, the bookends of Nantucket's whaling world. Maui dolphins were the catalyst. The historic links are strong. I actually moved here from New Zealand 20 years ago. And there is currently a New Zealand film being made, it's actually in post-production, about the Nantucket-New Zealand connection called Beyond the Known Seas. I'd love to get it here, and I believe I will. You may know that Herman Melville used New Zealand Maori chief Te Pehi Kupa as the character reference for Queequeg. And the eye of our white whale is the koru, New Zealand's unfolding silver fern, symbolizing new life, growth, strength, peace, and in the logo's case, a bit of peak. Maui are the smallest dolphin and the most endangered dolphin in the world. Only about 50 individuals left. They're in need of grand-scale help. Maui live only off the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. So in an effort to find leverage, Lord of the Rings in mind, and knowing that Middle-earth was the North Island of New Zealand, I came up with the Sea Hobbits reference. When the German organization NABU International used the term in a press conference, it was immediately picked up by 77 outlets around the world. Traction gained, a long way to go. MAN has and will continue to bring full-sized inflatable whales to our schools. Kids love it. Get an idea of size, scale, and knowledge. In collaborating with Miss Senna Wazer, we have done presentations at the Nantucket Lighthouse School, Nantucket New School, and here at the NHA. We made a lovely short doc with NCTV of Senna's presentation on ocean noise. We called it Sonic Youth, Senna's Passion for Whales. It is on YouTube as well as NCTV. We work to educate the public with visible displays, signage being an important part of that. For example, these North Atlantic right whale signs and proper whale watching guideline signs posted around the island. This one at the Mariah Mitchell Association Aquarium, which if you have not been to, I highly recommend you go to. It's one of the best little venues on the island. It's all local animals, including the tropicals, which like Nemo come up on the Gulf Stream and cohabitate for the summer. We also do a who, how, why, and what to do if you come across marine mammals on the beach. We instigated the origami whales on the island with Peggy Oki, creator of the Origami Whales Project in California. Peggy is known as the only girl on the Dogtown and Z-Boys surf skateboard team, another documentary worth watching. I noticed there's a ballet dancer over here reading a book. Should probably read that. As a skateboarder and a surfer, he was legendary. And legend has it, he was the best person on the team. In 2011, the elementary school had 5 Christmas trees up on Main Street, and Vice President Joe Biden noted their presence. Our students also turned origami whales into curtains, which then Senator John Kerry hung in his Washington, D.C. office. His comment, "The paper whales are hanging proudly in my front office, and everyone who sees them is reminded that our students are real activists who are thinking hard about the environment. This is the best kind of citizenship. I'm impressed by their creativity, and it's obvious there are great teachers on the job at Nantucket Elementary School, Nantucket New School, and the Lighthouse School who bring the environment to life for these kids." Senator John Kerry. Man advocacy has been successful in bylaw. We banned lighter-than-air gas balloons on Nantucket. And resolution. This resolution, I'm going to have to get close to it because I can't see the little slide from here. This resolution is to oppose offshore oil and gas exploration and extraction activities, including seismic air gun blasting, and to oppose any weakening of the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Our board, our select board, passed it unanimously in February of this year. It brought this type of resolution into New England for the first time. Because if you think again about NEMO, any oil and gas drilling and any leaks that happen south of here will end up on our beaches. It was very important. Seismic testing is also one of the, if they start doing seismic testing along the Atlantic seaboard, I believe you'll be able to write off right whales. One of MAN's board members, Blair Perkins, runs the only whale watching company on Nantucket, Shearwater Excursions. Blair is the only operator south of the Cape and east of Nantucket, thus a unique contributor to data and science. Again, we're talking education, education, education. Get out with them if you're seeing whales that no one else is seeing. Now, thanks to the NHA, MAN has a presence in this museum's brand new and very contemporary exhibit, taking the viewer through 20th century whaling, when far more whales were killed in a couple of decades than the hundreds of years of historic whaling before that, on through the Save the Whales movement of the 1970s, which was a forebear and really the beginning element in the environmental movement, into a new era of whale protection with tools used by the Center for Coastal Studies out in Provincetown to disentangle whales. This exhibit ends with MAN's information about North Atlantic right whales and our mission, which is to respond, rescue, protect, and advocate for marine mammals on and around Nantucket. Thank you to the Nantucket Historical Association for remembering Nantucket's history, and also that history begins the moment the words flow over our lips. We learn from this discourse. The Man Rescue Team is our most vital role. We received a stranding agreement from the federal government in mid-February of this year. We had been without one for 4 years after 33 years of functioning under the stranding agreement held by New England Aquarium. 2014, the aquarium made a hard decision to focus on endangered sea turtles, and that shifted their response away from Nantucket. This little girl that you see was washed up on Thanksgiving Day 2016. She was only 2 to 3 years old. She'd already been raked by orca, but more significantly, she had been entangled. And you can see the scars and notches on her right fluke. Last summer's huge whale event, with up to 20 whales swimming within eyesight of the beach for 6 weeks, 7 of them critically endangered right whales, the rest humpback whales, ended ironically when another youngster washed up on Matagasham Beach. She was the 50th humpback mortality in an event that has now claimed at least 65 humpback whales in just over 2 years in the greater Atlantic region, from Virginia to Maine. The 17th critically endangered North Atlantic right whale in an ongoing unusual mortality event that has now claimed 18 individuals in under 2 years, washed up on Nantucket November 26, 2017. Man organized for IFAW, Patrick's great organization, to come out and do the science on the animal. I include this slide for the irony of a dead whale and a plastic whale. That's the way I found them. Plastic is a huge problem we must mitigate on a grand scale globally. Then we'll speak a bit about that. There's also a good article in the current N magazine on plastic pollution and man. The next slide is drone footage from the South Shore last summer, all right whales, taken by a member of the public 100 meters off the beach. I'm going to see if I can do this correctly. Yes. No sound, just whales. And as I say, this is about 100 meters off the beach. You can see why they're there. See all those clouds in the water? Planktons, copepods. Smooth flukes. Humpback whales have a really serrated edge. On the right whales, very smooth fluke. In November and December of last year, we had over 60 short-beaked common dolphin in the harbor 3 weeks. There was a fairly high mortality. 5 of the animals died, possibly 6. However, it was an amazing event. And I was down at the boat basin and found that the dolphin had been coming into the boat basin every morning to feed. You can see the little fish there after their silver sides. This last side was a little friend who probably should have still been with Mom, and he thought I was Dad. No. You can hear it. He literally followed me from the beach. This is right next to the white elephant. I got a call about a dead seal. I went down. It turned out it was a live pup that was sleeping next to a sailboat. I told the owner of the house, let's go around to the front of the house and not stress him out. And talking about for 6 minutes, I looked over his shoulder. This is what I saw, and that's when, oh, no. I had to pick him up and bring him back down to the beach like a little puppy. Now remember, I can do that. I have a stranding agreement with the federal government. Joe Public can't go near any marine mammal. 150 feet guideline, endangered species, 500 meters, live, dead on the beach in the water. This is just an idea of what man rescue team is dealing with. Those are responses since mid-February of this year. There's 140 animals on this. About 2 hours ago, I got a call on the 141st animal since mid-February. That's the highest number of the 15 teams in the region. 6 weeks less time, and I'm not going out to Muskeget and Tuckernuck. Been out once. And I don't know if you can see, but there's a it's an indication of what this little island group is. We're an amazing little habitat, historically, and it's starting again. With that in mind, go back to this. And I'll hand it off to Senna now, speak about plastic, and then to Patrick. At the end, I hope we'll have time to do a Q&A and ask away at that stage. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Senna Wazer, and I'm really excited to be here tonight to talk to you guys about plastic pollution. So first, I'd like to give you just a little bit of background about myself. So 2 years ago, I decided that I wanted to get more youth involved because I am a youth. So I started Cetacean Society International Youth Group. And in general, we work to protect cetaceans, whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and the environment. I'm just going to go over a couple of things that we work on. So ship strikes is one of those. We work on educating people about them and trying to have people take measures that will help protect whales. We also work on educating people about noise pollution, because a lot of people don't realize that this is a problem in the ocean. So we work on educating the public, but we also work with policymakers, asking them to vote in a way that will help reduce the amount in the ocean. And we work on entanglements and educating people about sustainable seafood and what seafood isn't sustainable, what seafood gets a lot of bycatch. And we work a lot on plastic pollution. Most people don't realize what a big problem this is, so we're working to educate people to help them realize how huge of a problem it is. So I want to tell you what I've learned. This is me when I was 5, when I first got interested in whales. And I just want to kind of tell you what I've learned and why I think that this is a really big problem. So when I was 5, the first thing that I learned about was whales eating plastic. So there are 2 broad categories of whales. There are baleen whales and there are toothed whales. So this is a picture of a humpback whale filter feeding. It's a baleen whale. So all baleen whales are filter feeders. So they open their mouth, they take a big gulp of water and fish, and then they push out the water. But if there is any plastic in that fish floating around in there, then it's going to consume that plastic. And it will also consume any plastic that is in the small fish and krill that it eats. So they're definitely dying from this. It's not a question. We know for sure that baleen whales are dying from plastic. And it's the same thing for toothed whales, except for that they consume plastic in a slightly different way. So they mistake it for prey. They don't eat it the way that baleen whales do. So for example, sperm whales, they mistake plastic bags for squid. This whale in specific was found dead in Norway in 2016 with 30 plastic bags in its stomach. Just recently, there was another whale that washed up in Thailand with 80 plastic bags in its stomach. So clearly, this is also a problem for toothed whales. So that was what I learned about when I was younger, and then more recently, I learned about how toxins move up the food chain. First, it's important for you to know that plastics absorb toxins. They act like a sponge to them. An example of a toxin that plastics absorb are PCBs. So let's go through the food chain. So at the bottom of the food chain in the ocean is plankton. Some plankton photosynthesizes, and the bigger plankton eat the little photosynthetic plankton. And then right after them is krill. So the krill are trying to eat the plankton, but if there is a lot of plastic floating around with the plankton, then it will also eat plastic. So the krill start to build up some toxins and some plastic in their body. And then as you move up to things like sardines and mackerel, they begin to build up more and more toxins, more and more plastic in their body. So this here is a food chain for a humpback whale. A humpback whale could eat anything from plankton to mackerel, but it will build up some toxins and some plastic. But a humpback whale won't actually build up that many toxins compared to an apex predator like an orca. So for an orca, there would be another 1 or 2 steps in the food chain. So the tuna will eat the mackerel, and then the orca might eat the tuna, or there might be a seal thrown in there before the orca eats. So for apex predators, this is an even larger problem. So for all apex predators, we're at a really high risk of accumulating large amounts of toxins because of the food that we eat. So a really good example of this is the orcas on the west coast. They're apex predators, and they're building up very high levels of PCBs. And these are causing a lot of reproductive problems for them. 8 out of 10 calves born are male, and most of those males are sterile. So they're having a very, very large problem over there, and that's why they're so critically endangered. I also want to talk a little bit about plastic in fish. So there was a recent study published in 2015 in the peer-reviewed journal Scientific Reports, and it found that roughly 1 in 4 fish on the market have plastic in them. To me, that's a really scary statistic. 25% of the fish that we're eating has plastic in it, and plastic is very bad for us. It's an endocrine disruptor. It messes with the entire hormone system. And the toxins like PCBs that attach to them are also very bad for us. This fish in particular is a good example. It has 17 pieces of plastic in it, and it was caught in the Mississippi River. So for me, this is a very scary statistic, but I want to talk a little bit about where we're going with this. So this is a graph that was published in the peer-reviewed journal Scientific Advances in 2017. On the x-axis is time, from 1950 to 2015. And on the y-axis is millions of metric tons of plastic produced globally. So what I want to show you is not how much plastic was produced in 2015, but I want you to look at the trend. Where are we going with this? And unfortunately, we're not flatlining, we're not slowing down, we are continuing at a very alarming rate. Every year we produce more and more plastic, we consume more and more plastic. Our plastic production and consumption are skyrocketing. This is going to be a really big problem for future generations. It already is a big problem for us now. I want to talk about some solutions. But before I do that, if you're interested in learning more, I would suggest watching the movie A Plastic Ocean. It's very well done. They do a very good job presenting the issue, and they also give solutions. And it gives a lot more information than I was able to give you in this short amount of time. Okay, so solutions. I want to start with personal solutions. These are really easy things that you can do in your everyday life. So instead of using plastic water bottles, use reusable water bottles. You can get a metal one, a glass one, or even a plastic one. I prefer metal or glass. And you can use them, hundreds of times instead of once. Same thing for going to the grocery store. On Nantucket, plastic bags are banned, but if you live somewhere else where they aren't banned, then use reusable bags. And then when you go, to get a coffee, to get a tea, use reusable takeout containers or mugs. Most places are really willing to help you. I know the Starbucks in our town, my mom brings her own cup and they give her coffee in that. And then just looking around your house and seeing what plastic you don't need, what you could skip getting at the grocery store next time or wherever you're shopping. And then also what plastic you could reuse. Wash out your Ziploc bags, use them again. And then also just like a couple more things, buy in bulk. That's a really easy thing that we do. So we buy 25-pound bags of oats instead of, little tiny ones. But just, whatever you can, just look around and see what plastic you don't need or what plastic you could reduce and cut down on. Okay, so higher level solutions, policy changes. These are definitely a lot more difficult. They take a lot more time, but they also have a bigger impact. So banning plastic bags in your town are safe. If you live in Massachusetts, this might already have been done in your town because a lot of towns in Mass have done it. Or in California, the whole state did it. But for me in Connecticut, there's only 2 towns that have done it. So, if you live somewhere else, you have a very good chance that you could do this in your own town. So banning them is a really great step. It makes a big difference. And then if your town already has banned plastic bags, then work on banning something else. Straws is an example. Places are doing styrofoam cups. There are lots and lots of things that other Massachusetts states are doing. There's also a really great website, massgreen.org, that gives examples of what you can ban, and they also have just lots of information sheets about how to ban plastic bags in your town, because it can be a little overwhelming if you don't know where to start. Also, you don't need to worry about remembering the website name. I have handouts right over there, right here, and they have all the information that I'm going to talk about. Ooh. All right, so Massachusetts legislation. For those of you that are Massachusetts residents, I want to talk about this really quick. So I know it says 79 municipalities in Massachusetts have plastic bag bans. It's actually 80 now. So it's lots of Massachusetts places. But I want to talk a little bit about the state ban. So organizations in Massachusetts are saying, well, we've done so many towns, it would make more sense for the whole state to do it. It would actually be easier for businesses just to have it statewide. So there is a bill, House Bill number 4234, that is called an Act Reducing Plastic Bag Pollution. And it can get passed. It could do this. It could ban plastic bags in the state of Massachusetts, which would be amazing. So if you're a Massachusetts resident, if you could call your representative and senator and ask them to vote yes on this bill, that would be really amazing. If you don't know who your representative and senator are, then I would suggest going to this website, malegislator.gov, and then under legislators, find my legislator. You just punch in your address, and your legislators pop right up. And then you just click on them, and it gives you all their contact info. And before I end, I would like to share with you a couple quotes that I really like. So this one is from Robert Swan, who is an explorer and environmental leader. And he said that the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. And I really like that quote because I find it very true. And for me, it's also about what do we want to leave for future generations. Because every year that we let go by, we're making it harder and harder to pull ourselves out of this environmental crisis, and plastic pollution is really the perfect example. Putting plastic into the ocean is really easy, but taking it out is really hard. We can't filter the ocean. So I think that the solution is not to have to take more plastic out of the ocean, but rather to just not put it in. And that's why I think we need to take these steps now and not wait any longer. We need you. We need every person possible to chip in to help us save our future, the whale's future, and the ocean. And one last quote from Jane Goodall. She said, "What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make." And that's true, because we're just using plastic, we're not thinking about it, we're living our life, and that is making a difference. It's not a positive one, but decide to make that positive difference, because you can. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to contact me, this is my email, and please feel free to take a handout.
I had colleagues who, like me, have followed Senna Wazer's work, and I was sharing with some colleagues on our marine mammal rescue and research team based in Yarmouthport on Cape Cod earlier today that I was coming over and participating with our colleague Scott and the Marine Mammal Alliance Nantucket, and that James and the team here at NHA had invited me to participate, and that I would be following Senna Wazer and her remarks. And they said, "Oh, look out, Patrick! Look out." I was sitting back there enjoying Senna's presentation. I've been aware of her for some time, and colleagues in the NGO movement and I have lightheartedly said that we're vying to be the ones to recruit Senna when she comes out of college to work for this organization or that. I get the sneaking feeling that we'll all be working for her someday. And seeing her present here in front of this well-known quote by Mr. Macy, for decades, for deeds of true valor, we may safely point to the life of the whaleman and dare the world to produce a parallel between the valor and ingenuity and resourcefulness of the whaleman as represented here at these incredible exhibits, and the visionary voice of the next generation of people committed to safeguarding and stewarding and conserving the whales, as represented here today by Senna Wazer, come our generations. And our parents successfully imposed a global ban on the killing of whales for commercial products around the world. The ingeniousness and resourcefulness and, yes, valor of the Nantucket whaleman had ripple effects around the planet. And 2 centuries of commercial exploitation of these species, whale oil lit the lamps of the Western world and had much to do with the prosperity of Nantucket, and certainly our region, and ultimately countries around the world. And our parents' generation, with strong leadership, interestingly, by then President Ronald Reagan, in the 1980s, imposed a moratorium on the killing of whales for their commercial products. And we began to understand in the leading up to that historic decision more and more about the ocean ecosystem and how whales played an important part in that ecosystem. Scientists here in our region at Woods Hole Oceanographic, New England Aquarium, the Center for Coastal Studies, my own organization, the International Fund for Animal Welfare, working with Scott at MMAN and others, are discovering and helping pioneer new understandings and new solutions to a lot of the challenges that these marine mammals face, challenges that ultimately impact the ocean environment on which the health, welfare, and prosperity of our own species also depends. My small task today, since we focused a little bit through Scott on the situation on and around Nantucket, and thanks to Senna on some opportunities that are in front of us in Massachusetts and in the US with respect to the issue of plastics and some of the other threats that she highlighted. My small task is to fly you around the planet and introduce you to some of the work that my organization, IFAW, is doing through our 16 country offices and regional offices around the world. And any convergence between the threats that Senna outlined at the beginning of her presentation and some that I will mention here and give you a visual sense of both in photograph and in film is entirely intentional because she has rightly and very clearly identified some of the threats that these animals face today, more threats, frankly, than at any time in history. The threat of commercial whaling has now largely receded, but whales and other marine creatures face more threats today than ever before in history. A little bit about IFAW, for those of you who may not be familiar. We were founded almost 50 years ago. We began as an organization singularly focused on the protection of cute baby seals, such as the video clip that Scott shared with us. Founded in Fredericton, New Brunswick in Canada, and in the intervening years have expanded our work to an array of animal welfare and conservation issues and a range of countries and regions around the world. We're committed to pioneering solutions that rescue, rehabilitate, and release animals into safe habitats. We believe that individual animals matter in conservation, and we're committed to a solutions-oriented and partnership approach to solve some of these pressing challenges that we and they face. And over that 50-year period, while we have a significant amount of terrestrial work protecting elephants and other species from a variety of threats, we have a proud legacy of several decades of work in the marine conservation area focused principally on whale protection. And just last year, in 2017, reflecting the range of familiar and new and emerging threats to the marine environment, we reconstituted what had been a global whale program that was my privilege to lead for about a decade into what we now call a marine conservation program and strategy, continuing to deal with the threat of whaling, but also a new and evolved range of threats. IFAW is pleased to partner with each of the organizations that I mentioned, and on an international basis, we work closely with local, national, and international non-governmental organizations. What distinguishes us and makes us a bit of a breed apart in the NGO world is that we are constituted as one organization. We have different legal entities, but one board, one executive team, one set of policies, and that's a lucky legacy of our structure and the approach taken by our founder, but we're a single organization, not a confederation or a franchised organization. We work to undertake effective advocacy across nations and cultures with our offices led by local nationals. And as I say, we've had a significant focus over the years on marine protection in particular. What I'm going to do, by way of introducing, and when Scott and James were explaining my mandate, I thought that the best way to quickly and efficiently introduce you to some of the challenges that we're working on worldwide would be, in a sense, to fly you around a couple of key regional areas and countries where we are working and give you a quick taste of that work, and then ultimately move toward Q&A with Senna, Scott, and myself. So we'll begin where the day begins each day on our planet, in Oceania, and through an office that we have in Sydney, Australia. Our team remains very focused on Japan's whaling in the Antarctic. Unfortunately, since the imposition of the worldwide moratorium on commercial whaling, Japan has persisted with whaling in the Antarctic region and in the North Pacific, using the pretext of science, claiming that the whales are being killed for scientific research purposes, to maintain, despite strong international criticism and even a judgment of the International Court of Justice against that whaling program, to maintain an ongoing hunt for commercial purposes in a sort of quixotic effort to eventually revive the full-scale whaling industry and international trade in whale meat. So being proximate to that, we do a lot of the work on whaling led by our office in Sydney, Australia. Australia itself, a champion of whale conservation worldwide now, earlier, like our own country, a prominent whaling nation, celebrates National Whale Day each year. This public manifestation on a beach near Sydney is an example of some of that public work. We're also working in Sydney on combating wildlife trafficking, including shark finning, the unfortunate products of which are shown here. Australia is both an importer and exporter of shark fin, despite a strong international stance on the species trade in international meetings. And we're doing research into that and fashioning solutions at both a state and federal level in Australia to address that challenge, which we've also worked on in the US and other countries. Protection of marine habitats at the Great Barrier Reef, in the Hauraki Gulf in New Zealand, and in a special World Heritage Site called Kangaroo Island, which, like our own coast here off of New England and the east coast of North America, is increasingly threatened by seismic exploration activities, and oil and gas development activities are among the campaign causes that keep my colleagues down under very busy. Like Scott and the team here on Nantucket, and like our marine mammal rescue and research team on Cape that increasingly deploys internationally, Australia and New Zealand are building their own capacity, often with assistance from IFAW in terms of best practices, equipment, information sharing, and capacity building to respond better to stranding challenges. New Zealand and the Cape, as you know from the news, and here on Nantucket in particular, look no further than the graphic where Scott showed the responses since February, are unique sites where both mariners and marine mammals over the years have unfortunately become stranded. And so enhanced response capacities in those areas are fundamental to rescuing, rehabilitating, and releasing those animals. Japan has long been the driver in efforts to continue commercial whaling. And based on several decades of working at the International Whaling Commission and encouraging the US, European countries, Australia, New Zealand, Latin American countries, and others to pressure Japan in international fora to end its whaling activities, it is our conviction that ultimately the last three countries still killing whales for commercial purposes in 2018, Japan, Iceland, and Norway, will end that practice They will do so not because decision makers in Washington or Wellington or Canberra or London made that decision. The decision to end whaling by those three countries will be made in Tokyo, Reykjavik, and Oslo by elected and appointed officials there for reasons that make sense to them. And increasingly, our work at the International Fund for Animal Welfare is oriented toward that reality. We're working inside the whaling countries to accelerate and encourage that decision. It is absolutely fascinating work in terms of the cultural confrontations and collaborations, and in trying to reframe the debate or reframe the issue to encourage forward progress. A lot of that work is promoting the positive alternative of whale and dolphin watching, an industry that, according to several reports that we have done over the years, now involves some 118 countries and territories worldwide. It's about $2.1 billion, according to our last report that we published in 2010. $2.1 billion industry when you consider direct ticket revenues and associated tourism revenues. And it can make a real difference. As we know, tourism and ecotourism can make a real difference in communities that were formerly profiting from commercial whaling. The man on the left there is Miyauchi-san, Mr. Miyauchi, and the boat behind him is called the Flipper. It's a small whale and dolphin watching vessel in Choshi Prefecture, just south of Tokyo. Mr. Miyauchi and my longtime colleague, our Japan representative for many years, Ms. Naoko Funahashi, are among the network of people that now spreads from Hokkaido, the northern island in Japan, down to Okinawa in the south. There are 150 whale watch operators strewn across the Japanese islands around the coast. It's a very popular undertaking. Unfortunately, in contrast to some of the boats that we see in Provincetown, in Barnstable, on Cape Ann, the average number of employees of those 150 operations is 1.2. It's still early going in the development of the industry in much smaller scale than we enjoy here in the U.S. Encouragingly, though, the Japanese government, relatively quietly, has begun to subsidize and encourage the development of bird watching and whale watching around the coast of Japan. Why? Because Shinzo Abe, arguably the most pro-whaling prime minister of the post-war period in Japan, has an overriding goal to encourage international tourism to Japan. And senior tourism officials in his government have been encouraging prefectures to invest in and promote whale watching at some time of year anywhere around the Japanese islands. It's not seasonal. At some point in Japan, throughout the calendar year, because of the depths of the water, the ocean currents, the water temperature, you can see whale and dolphins. It's ironically a fantastic site for whale watching in a way that is similar to the Cape and the islands, New Bedford, former center and locus for Yankee whaling, also spectacular whale and dolphin watching and associated economic activities today. North of Japan, Sakhalin Island is home to a critical habitat for the western gray whale, a very endangered populations of gray whales, which swims off of the Korean peninsula and migrates north off of Russia, returning each year, mothers and calves, in lagoons off of Sakhalin Island. Unfortunately for this endangered population of whales, their habitat sits atop some of the world's largest reserves of natural gas. And every petroleum company that you have ever heard of is active at Sakhalin Island. There are about 150 of these western gray whales in this particular population that remain, and we are taking steps, engaging with industry, identifying alternatives. We had Shell take the bold step of reconfiguring and moving a pipeline out of critical habitat areas, and through a process at the Western Gray Whale Advisory Panel, lenders to the oil and gas projects at Sakhalin have imposed a requirement that the world's top scientists would sit on a panel and review the activities of the petroleum companies, specifically Shell, Gazprom, and with some influence on ExxonMobil activities up until their departure over the last year from Russia, with very positive effect. Europe is critical to successful marine advocacy success worldwide. Why? Because the 28 countries of the European Union and their voting bloc in international fora, in which the U.S. also participates in a range of other countries, when they vote in a conservation-minded direction, the outcomes reflect that. If Europe is not on board with particular changes, it becomes very difficult to make policy progress from a conservation perspective. One of the main issues that we've been working on beyond whaling in Europe is the ocean noise issue.
The ocean is a completely different place acoustically.
There's a short excerpt here from a film.
Sound can travel enormous distances, very, very fast,
Called Sonic Sea.
whereas light doesn't travel very far at all. And the whales have evolved to take advantage of that. They can hear storms that are 1,000 miles away. They see the ocean through sound. So their mind's eye is their mind's ear.
Ocean noise from shipping, seismic exploration and industrial development of oil and gas, and military sonar poses, in some cases, a lethal threat to whales and is the focus of significant concern. Senna alluded to this earlier, just off our own shores, concerns about the accelerated permitting process and oil and gas leasing and exploratory permits being opened up is a focus for the International Fund for Animal Welfare and a range of organizations, our own, Oceana, NRDC, and others, including, as we heard, Cetacean Society International. Ship strikes are another threat associated with shipping. The collisions between high-speed vessels and slow-moving whales usually end badly for the whale. And innovative measures, thankfully, over the last decade or so in U.S. waters have made a significant difference in this threat. The movement of shipping lanes, affording industry the predictability that it needs, but based on sound science, moving shipping lanes away from repeated concentrations of whales have made a critical difference. U.S. government regulation in terms of seasonal speed restrictions and seasonal or dynamic management areas, no-go zones, to separate mariners and whales have been making a real difference on this threat. We take encouragement from that and hope when it comes to the threat of entanglement that we'll see similar progress. More on that when we get to right whales in a moment. An ocean away from here in the Med, in Europe, we're working with researchers in the Hellenic Trench off of Greece to protect sperm whales from collisions with ships, a threat they face there similar to the right whales in our own waters. Shipping also impacts blue whales off the coast of Sri Lanka. The New York Times over the last 48 hours has posted an epic article about a particular large shipping port supported by the Chinese government significantly financially off Sri Lanka. Blue whales, the largest animal ever to inhabit our planet. A bull elephant could stand on the tongue of a blue whale. An estimated 50 to 80 per year are being struck in busy international shipping lanes off the southern coast of Sri Lanka. And together with Sri Lankan researchers, IFAW scientists, and even organizations like the World Shipping Council and associated industry organizations are endeavoring to encourage the Sri Lankan government to move shipping lanes and go through the steps at the International Maritime Organization in London to impose that conservation solution. And we're excited that there's even strong industry support for it. Again, separating marine mammals and ships being the best way to ensure that both continue to thrive. We have an office in London in the United Kingdom. We work on a full range of issues there. But IFAW enjoys consultative status on behalf of the NGO community at the International Maritime Organization. We are the go-to organization for whales and shipping, and have worked shoulder by shoulder with the U.S. government and with industry associations such as those I mentioned to achieve positive outcomes there. Iceland is one of the 3 countries that unfortunately continues its commercial whaling practices, and Scott and I were chatting with Senna and her father Ed shortly before today's presentation, and Scott was noting that Iceland's lone fin whaler, a man named Christian Lofsson, has returned to fin whaling after a 3-year hiatus just this week, and the first fin whale has been brought in this season. He's targeting more than 200 fin whales, second largest of our planet's great whales. Similar to the approach that I described with respect to Japan, we're working inside the country through Icelanders, with Icelandic partners, particularly from the tourism and ecotourism industry, to make a difference there, to help encourage a shift in public opinion, and we're seeing that shift. This gorgeous-looking Icelander, a man named Högni Egilsson, who, if you follow Icelandic rock groups, you'll quickly identify him as the lead singer in an Icelandic band called Gus Gus, fronts a website for us that you can find if you go to ifaw.is, and it highlights the fact that 40% of the whale meat consumed in Iceland is being consumed by visiting tourists. It's tourists from the U.S., the UK, other parts of Europe, and internationally that are contributing to the problem. And so we are working on a very positive approach to inform and educate tourists so they make whale-friendly choices during their stay in Iceland. The slogan of the campaign is Iceland's beautiful whales, meet us, don't eat us. And pictured here between our India director and colleague Vivek Menon of the Wildlife Trust of India and our president and CEO Azzedine Downs. The man in the middle there is Ambassador Robert Barber, the Obama administration ambassador to Reykjavik, and we continue to work with the deputy chief of mission there. The Trump administration has not yet gotten an ambassador to Reykjavik, but the U.S. and other embassies are working hard, not just on giving Icelanders information and encouraging a different approach by their government, but on encouraging our own citizens not to be part of the problem by consuming whale meat. And here we are. Scott and Senna have alluded to some of the challenges in U.S. waters. I would say for us, our top priority over the next 5 years, both here in the U.S. And for the marine conservation work of our organization, is to save the whale that migrates right through our backyard here, the North Atlantic right whale. And as you'll learn, if you haven't seen it already, in the Candle Factory from a nice display produced by MAN, the Marine Mammal Alliance of Nantucket, there are about 450 of these creatures left. Michael Moore and other scientists that we're working closely with at Woods Hole now estimate that's about 435, with about 100 breeding age females, and record mortality, sadly, in 2017. 17 whales were killed. We know this in part because some of my IFAW colleagues at our Marine Mammal Rescue and Research team are literally elbow and shoulder into this. We help conduct the necropsies that are federally administered, determining cause of death of these whales, entanglement in fishing gear, and collisions with large vessels. The majority of mortalities in 2017 were in Canadian waters. Over the years, U.S. fishermen and certainly the U.S. shipping industry have adapted their practices, their gear, their speeds in the case of the shipping industry, to adapt and allow whales to be safer in U.S. waters. Canada, which has taken dramatic measures in recent weeks, had not been doing any of that. And sadly, that was apparent in 2017 when we saw these record numbers of deaths. The best and the brightest at Woods Hole New England Aquarium and on our own scientific team say we have 5 years to change the trajectory of in numbers, particularly the number of breeding females. There have been no new calves spotted yet in 2018. So urgent action is needed now by government and industry to ensure that this whale makes it through the 21st century. One of the tools that we've devised in order to do that is the result of a collaboration with David Wiley and the team at Stellwagen Bank National Marine Sanctuary and some clever app developers from a company called Conserve.io. And the resulting product of our three-way collaboration is the Whale Alert app. It's free to download on your iPhone or Android device. And it's a heads-up tool for mariners to give them a real-time sense of where they are, where whales have been heard or sighted. And I can attest, as the crash test dummy at my organization, that there's an idiot-friendly whale identification guide where you can report or identify a whale, even if you're not going to report it, whether it's live or in distress, and you can get tips that will help you, and a helpful photo ID guide. So whether you're out on a boat or on shore and see a whale, you can both learn more about it, and if you're interested, report it directly via the app and contribute to the database and researchers working to help and protect whales immediately that way. Some of the work that we're doing off of the Cape, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard involves partnering with lobstermen to produce whale-friendlier fishing gear. And as you may have read last week in the Cape Cod Times, and if you do get the Cape Cod Times, check it tomorrow or the next day. I spoke today with Marianne Bragg, one of the top reporters focused on the right whale issue, and she continues to follow this story. We will be partnering with the Massachusetts Lobstermen's Association over the course of this summer with some experimental gear. And using the ingenuity and resourcefulness of fishermen who are making their living from the water, and the best pointy-headed scientists and techies that we can muster to explore this. No single group can do that alone, but we're pleased to build on our long-standing collaborations with the Massachusetts Lobstermen and to be working with Woods Hole, New England Aquarium, Center for Coastal Studies, and others on this important effort. In the Caribbean, and don't worry, we're almost done with the planet. In the Caribbean, we're undertaking some educational floating classroom work, initially modeled and staffed by scientists and educators here on the Cape. We've got some unique habitat protection initiatives looking at national legislation and regulation of marine protected areas up and down the migratory range of the humpback whale in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, a two coasts, two corridors, or two seas initiative. And we and many in the conservation community are increasingly looking not just at Antarctica, and the protection of Antarctica and the elaboration of sanctuaries there, and ultimately, finally, the end of commercial whaling activities in the Southern Ocean, but also at the Arctic, which, as I'm sure many here are very well aware, of the range of emerging threats, some having to do with climate change, some with oil and gas development as countries eye the Arctic and try to position themselves either via the Arctic Council or through unilateral activities for continued oil and gas development. Ironic a bit, since one of the drivers of environmental change in the Arctic is climate change, and increased shipping through the Northern Passage, which poses new threats not just to environmental safety, but of marine species and human safety and welfare as well. Looking ahead for us, just to give you a peek at some things that we're cooking that are in the pipeline for the International Fund for Animal Welfare. We're in the development stages of a multimedia touring event with a strong musical component. The working title is called Majesty of the Deep, exploring our longstanding relationship with marine mammals. That may be coming soon to a symphony hall near you. We are updating between now and 2020 our global assessment of the economic value of whale watching.
I have a daughter who's 4.5, and she hasn't seen a whale yet. And I want to make sure that she sees a whale, and that her kids see whales, and their kids see whales.
Oh my God! Oh my God! Look, his belly! Look at the white! Wow!
It's been an honor for me to speak here at the Nantucket Whaling Museum. Humbling to follow Senna, and I'm very grateful for your patient attendance this evening, and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you.
So if you guys have any questions, we're here to answer them the best we can.
What about the indigenous people, like in Alaska, the Native Alaskans? Their tradition, cultural heritage is whaling as part of it. Will they still be allowed to do so?
Patrick can speak to that directly.
Yeah, the last time that James and I were together, I believe, was in the context of a conference that welcomed Alaska Native whaling community representatives to Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and to New Bedford. It was called Stories of the Whale. And some of these leaders from these very remote villages, which are dependent for their protein on a subsistence native hunt, came, and with some of the historical resources, they toured the museum here. They toured a series of museums on the Vineyard, and then ultimately New Bedford. Some were able to identify strong genetic ties because those Iron Men in wooden boats that set out from our local communities here in the era of Yankee whaling sailed down around the tip of South America and up to Alaska, following the whales, as they did to New Zealand as well, but would winter over in native communities, and sometimes stay, trying to get a jump on the whales, get a jump on the competition for the seasonal whale hunting, and human nature being what it is, some of these representatives from Alaska Native communities came with information about their ancestors who were associated with the whaling industry on Cape Cod, Nantucket, and Martha's Vineyard. It was tremendously moving to help facilitate that interaction. The United States, at the next meeting of the International Whaling Commission in September in Florianopolis, Brazil, will, as they are obliged to do every 6 years, take a native quota request, which has to be endorsed by the Whaling Commission. We fully expect that ultimately that body will again award that quota on which the native hunters depend. Our focus as an organization is on the commercial enterprise and the international trade and very high-tech industrial whaling as prosecuted today by other countries, and not on native whaling on which these communities continue to depend. There are a range of perspectives among well-meaning organizations, but that's our strong feeling.
Just a quick question myself or a comment. Could you mention a little bit about the politics that goes on at the International Whaling Commission over Aboriginal subsistence whaling?
Yeah, unfortunately, you get the sense that that the native quota is sometimes held hostage by countries who want to use it, and the U.S. obligation to get that quota approved to extract other outcomes at the International Whaling Commission. In fact, you can sometimes feel that maybe the only whaling the IWC is prepared to regulate, perversely, is native whaling. And there are well-meaning groups and organizations, men and women of conscience, who have expressed strong concern about animal welfare considerations and some conservation considerations with respect to native whaling. But whatever your opinion, there are some pro-whaling countries that are willing to grind the forum to a halt and threaten the subsistence rights of these native Alaskan and Russian and several other small communities around the world in order to achieve other outcomes. Nowhere is immune to politics.
Senna, I have a question for you. How many kids do you have on the Cetacean Society youth group?
Not very many. I'd say we have about 7 people who come to our meetings and like really do stuff with us, and yeah, do our work with us and do our activities.
7's a good number, and we have a lot of kids on this island who are quite proactive. And I'm hoping to see them get involved more too. As John Kerry said, we've got some amazing students and some amazing teachers. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Correct. And when scientists say that, that means none have been observed, obviously, but our federal tax dollars, significant amount of federal tax dollars go into close monitoring of the population. So sadly, to date, none have been born. 5 were born in the previous year.
And keep in mind that last year there were 5. And I think that this can be related to body health and infertility. 80% of the animals, over 80%, have been entangled at least once. Over 50% have been entangled more than once. If you're a gravid female and your body is under that much stress, you become infertile. And that, I think, is the problem.
Breeding age females, I think 103 is the last count that I've heard. Sexual maturity is achieved at 10 years. They typically calve every 2 to 3 years, but as Scott's answer mentions, and we're lucky in this region because we have this proud, incredible heritage, but also some of the world's top scientific minds that are working on these issues. And the scientists at Woods Hole and elsewhere say that this is likely an evolutionary response. As Scott says, if you can't feed yourself and you're not maintaining your own blubber reserves and you're facing the trauma of entanglement situations, difficulty communicating because of ocean noise and other threats, you're just not going to calve if you're having difficulty feeding yourself and keeping yourself healthy.
Yes, sir. I haven't been tracking any Navy vessels lately. I don't know.
Each of us have given film plugs, and I came up close to the brink, and I'll just go ahead now. I showed the one excerpt from a film called Sonic Sea that looks principally not at the marine plastics or marine debris issue, but at the ocean noise issue. And Sonic Sea, produced by the Natural Resources Defense Council in association with my organization, IFAW, and Senna has in fact screened this movie in different settings, is now being shown at the Naval Academy at Annapolis. Because Navy sonar is one of the principal areas that is examined. And having dealt with Pentagon people on these issues over the years, there is an unrelenting search on for reducing the footprint, certainly the peacetime footprint of military activities in land, air, and sea. And once those policies are undertaken, the nature of the military is that compliance tends to be pretty good. So we're encouraged in this instance by the Navy with the seriousness with which they are taking issues, even if there might be disagreements over the need for and regularity of particular kinds of uses of their sonar in peacetime. As a friend of mine from the NRDC, Joel Reynolds, likes to say, we're for national security, but we don't believe that whales should have to die for practice. And in both the Atlantic and the Pacific, the Navy has shown a willingness, sometimes with the sometimes under court order, but increasingly with a far-sighted and very welcome approach that puts protection of our natural heritage at the vanguard of the military's activities, not at its rear guard, and we're very encouraged by that.
Okay, folks, thank you very much. Don't forget Senator's flyers here. There's also some Marine Mammal Alliance Nantucket information. Please pick it up. All right, thank you.